Hi everyone. So this section is going over integers and their operations. So we're going to be looking at how to interpret integers, how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide integers, and also looking at solving application problems. So in our Discover activity, it says, negative numbers may seem abstract since they don't represent physical counts. However, there are naturally occurring situations in which we have less than zero, such as debt. Negative numbers allow us to describe such situations. So, as you work throughout this section, keep those following questions in mind. Knowing the difference between the sign and size of a number, um, knowing when two negatives make a positive, and to know why the result of a calculation is positive or negative. When a situation requires a negative number, there are many ways to express it. On a budget sheet, you might see negative quantities in red or in parentheses. So negative numbers are represented with red or parentheses, and positive numbers are written in black or without parentheses. When describing altitudes, below sea level might be written as a negative number. In other cases, the negative may be implied but not written. So here are a few ways that, or words that imply negativity. The word decreasing, the word debt, the word less, the word down, and also if they say owes a certain amount. So in example 1, the following situations contain negative numbers used in real life situations. We're going to interpret what each one means. So if this says negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit, we're going to interpret that as 30 degrees below zero. So that's how we usually refer to it when we talk about negative temperatures. For Part B, it says a poll reports that 47% plus or minus 3% of Americans would vote for the incumbent president. So if you're going to do plus or minus, you're going to have one version with the minus and one version with the plus. So you're going to have 44% all the way to 50%. And so that would be your interpretation of that. Our next definition is absolute value. Every number other than zero has a sign. So we don't consider zero to be positive or negative, but every other number has a sign. It's either positive or negative. Every number also has two parts. It has its sign and it has its size. So when we think of the number -5, we can think of it as having a negative sign and its size is 5. So something to think about with size is that it's always the distance to zero. That number is to zero. So therefore, it's always positive. Because distance is always positive. So therefore, when we think of what the size of it is, it's always going to end up being a positive. So the size of a number is the informal way of saying how far the number is from zero on a number line. In mathematics, we refer to the size of a number as its absolute value. To indicate absolute value, we're going to draw vertical bars either before or after the number. And these are going to look like, you might have vertical lines that look like that, or they might look like this. Two numbers that have the same size but opposite signs are called opposites because they are on opposite sides of zero on the number line. For example, the absolute value of -5 is 5 because -5 is still 5 units from zero. And the absolute value of -5 is written as this, and the numbers 5 and -5 are opposites. Okay, so when we look at example 2, the opposite of -8 would be +8, and you can write it like that, or you can write it with plus 8. So the opposite of 7 would be negative 7. Now remember that absolute value is the distance from 0. So negative 11 is 11 away from 0, because distance is always positive. 11 is also 11 away from 0. So it still has the same absolute value. So we have 11. Now when we look at E and F, if we just took the absolute value part here, that alone is just 11, but we have a negative in front of it. So our final answer is negative 11. And the same thing with this one. Just the absolute value part is going to be positive 11, but there's a negative in front, so we have negative 11 as our answer. What is the sign of 24? The sign of 24 is positive, or a plus sign, and the size is how far it is from 0, so it has a sign of 24. Or sorry, size of 24. We can go ahead and skip these ones. Do you know what I'm actually going to have us do those? Or I'm going to have us do A. So this would be the opposite of negative 6. This would be the opposite of negative 6. So then the opposite of negative 6 would be equal to positive 6. And you can write that with a plus sign or just as 6. Being able to visualize negative numbers on a number line is helpful not only for interpreting them, but also for using them in calculations. In the active example next, number lines will be used to help you make sense of the rules that are developed for signed number operations. Solve each of the following problems by drawing a number line picture and writing a calculation. It is 34 degrees below 0, but the temperature will increase 12 degrees throughout the day. So if we have it starting at below 0, 0 would be right here. We would start at negative 34 because it's 34 below. If it's increasing, it's going to go in the positive direction, so that would be like adding 12, and we would end up at negative 22. So if we also want to just write it as an operation, it would be negative 34 plus 12, and we would get negative 22 degrees, or you could think of it as 22 degrees below 0. For this one, it says a civilization began in 100 BC, which is our negative or the before 0. So this would be representing a negative 100. And it says that it lasted 450 years. So if it lasted 450 years, it's going to be going in the positive 450, and we would end up at 350. So the other way we can think of this is negative 100 plus 450, and we get 350, and it's a positive, so we can think of it as AD. For C, it says the stock market has already lost 12 points for the day, but in the next hour, it drops 43 points more. What is the total loss? So we would begin at a negative 12 because it lost 12 points, but then it drops 43 points more. So it's going to go 43 points in the negative. So this as an operation would be like negative 12 minus 43. And we would get negative 55, and this would be points. You could also think of it as negative 12 plus negative 43 and get the same answer as well. So either way, we end up at a total loss of 55 points. When solving problems involving signed numbers, it's important to interpret your answer carefully. A negative result might be stated as a negative number or as a decrease, but you want to be careful not to be redundant by stating it as a negative decrease. That would just cancel it out. So if we look here, this talks about signed numbers and how to add and subtract them. instead of us focusing a ton of time on this, I just want you guys to be able to calculate these in your calculator. And that's just extra. That shouldn't have been in there. So for this example 5, all you would want to do is practice figuring out what these are in your calculator. So I would just type these in your calculator, and I'm going to pause the video just to put what the answers are, and then you can check your answers with what I have here. Okay, so those should be your answers for example 5. These state the rules for multiplying and dividing. So on example 6, you will just practice putting these in your calculator. So again, I'll just pause the video and get the answers for you. Okay, so those are your examples for your answers for example 6, and that wraps up lesson 0.3.